Hi, I'm Greg Uland with Reynolds, and this is Connected. We are live at the NADA show in Las Vegas. This is probably the busiest show that I've experienced. It is fantastic right now. Today, I get to sit down with Terry O'Loughlin. Terry's the Director of Compliance at Reynolds & Reynolds. Terry, always a pleasure to see you and talk with you. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure to be here.
So, Terry, you are a Hall of Famer. You were inducted into the F&I Hall of Fame last year. That was pretty amazing.
I appreciated that, Greg. I'm quite humbled by it.
Yeah, I mean, you've been doing this for a while and having an impact for a while.
36 years.
36 years. I mean, congratulations on that. But, you know, it's very impressive, but as impressive or more impressive is the impact you've been able to have in that 36 years. So I appreciate you. I know the dealers appreciate you and everything that you've done in your team and everybody that you've worked with. So
thank you.
It makes a big difference.
Proud to do it, and I'm committed to protecting dealer interests on behalf of Reynolds & Reynolds.
Yep, that's great. So, Terry, you were, I think, at ATA, their meetings yesterday.
Yes.
I was able to interact with some folks there. How'd that go? What was that environment like?
They had a terrific turnout. The dealer associations are being very careful about the changing landscape of compliance. It's always a top issue. Dealers are always a big target for attorney general's offices, private plaintiffs' counsel. There's whole associations dedicated to suing car dealers. National Consumer Law Center, for example. So they are cognizant of the issues with the CFPB literally being shrunken by the Trump administration. They can't eliminate it. The Federal Trade Commission also being constrained. So the various other state agencies are coming to the fore, and they are trying to fill that void in every way they possibly can. So that's what's going on. And the ATA, the executives, Automotive Trade Association executives, ATA, they are very aware of this phenomenon.
Yeah, and it's such an important function because, you know, it's frustrating for probably a lot of us to see some of these lawsuits that come out and, you know, they feel in many cases frivolous, but at the end of the day, the law is the law. You have to follow the law, and then you have to defend against it if somebody claims that you didn't follow the law. And it can be really frustrating, but it's an important part of our business. It's part of doing business as a car dealer because there are so many of these organizations that are out there.
Yeah, and I think car dealers may be the most regulated industry in the country.
Sure.
And the panoply of laws and regulations they have to discharge increases. It never seems to decline. There seems to be no sunsetting of the statutes or regulations.
Right.
Consequently, the burden just grows. And as an industry, a partner in the industry that Reynolds is, we have to help them accommodate that as best we can. And I think we're doing a mighty fine job at that.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, it's interesting. You say it keeps growing and growing. We talk about that a lot. I talk to dealers, and we actually, you know, look at if you printed out a car deal, right, single copy, you print it out, it's approximately 39 feet of paper.
Sure is.
Right, like 39 feet. And you think about it, and there isn't a single car dealer, I don't think, that asks for 1 foot of that, right? That's all been put on them by regulation.
Yeah, and in 1940, it took one document to sell and finance a vehicle. It's 1940. Now think about that. That's probably not that long ago when you think about it. It's 39 feet or more. And with every additional regulation, it's going to grow.
Yep, you're right. You're right. So let's dig in. One thing I wanted to really go a little deep with you on is the California Cars Act.
Sure.
You know, obviously passed. It's going to go into effect this year in 2026. You know, maybe just share what the impacts are, what the changes are, and then we can get into some different pieces from there.
Sure. Let me put this in perspective. The Federal Trade Commission was founded in 1914. And the Unfair or Deceptive Acts and Practices, UDAP, statute was promulgated with FTC in 1938.
Okay.
UDAP is in every state. UDAP is the primary law that is used to sue car dealers. All class actions, all private plaintiffs' counsel, all attorneys general, they all use UDAP. And the simple premise of UDAP is if something has a tendency to deceive a consumer, tendency or capacity to deceive a consumer, then it's a violation of the law. Very low bar. It shatters caveat emptor. That is the whole premise for the CARS rule, because there's been, and prior to the CARS, we'll get to in a minute, the Car Buyer's Bill of Rights, which was in California. That was passed in 2005. So what I'm trying to drive at give the greater view that these laws don't come out of thin air. They are part of a greater scheme of enforcement. They become far more distinctive because they add layers. Much of the CARS rule, the combating auto CARS rule, you could just use the UDAP, which covers probably 70% of that, because it sort of reinforces the application of UDAP, unfairness of trade practices, but with some distinctions. So that's where we are. Now, getting back to the rule that Governor Schwarzenegger signed in 2005, Car Buyers Bill of Rights, that had features in it that were similar to the CARS rule, but they were then struck by very effective lobbying on behalf of the California New Car Dealers Association. Your Welch and I went over that a while back.
Yeah.
And ironically, when I was on the dark side, I worked for the Florida Attorney General's office. I helped draft the Car Buyers Bill of Rights for California because I was part of a group that sued car dealers in those days.
Right.
So this new law, which continues some of that idea of the Car Buyers Bill of Rights, and obviously it calls upon the Federal Trade Commission's rule that was struck last year at this time, the CARS rule, the federal CARS rule.
Right.
It tracked that very carefully. So that's where we are with this. And the key to it all, full and fair disclosures, because the combat between, and that's why it's called combating in the rule, combating fraud, is the idea of a very complex transaction of buying a car, financing a car. How can you help the consumer understand the transaction?
Yeah.
And that's what it's all about. And it just creates this burden of dealers having to explain. And now, if in a couple of points, one of which is that the rule itself really says you've got to show the price of the car total, except for tag and title, and the documentary fee. You got that plus tag title and so on. So that's really what, whether it's advertising, whether it's disclosure, whether it's discussion with the consumer. So full and fair disclosure is what all of this is about. Now, there are other parts to it as well, but that's really if a dealer is making every effort at every juncture when the question arises about how much does this cost, what's the financing, that triggers this full and fair disclosure. So dealers who make an effort to disclose fully, fairly every time the question arises, they will solve some of this problem.
Yeah. So I guess thinking about that, because I don't know, it's not like, to me, and maybe I'm naive, I really don't think dealers are intentionally hiding stuff. I don't think that they're not disclosing information. So what needs to change, right? So, and this is California, but we're going to talk about the implications maybe throughout the U.S. in a minute. But in California, what are dealers going to need to change this year when this law is in effect?
Well, first of all, they're advertising.
Okay.
All their advertising, they're going to have to. They can't just show MSRP. They have to really show the sales price they're offering the vehicle for.
Okay.
Without tag title taxes plus this documentary fee. So they have to show that in full. They can't show it in any other way. They can't show a price that is minus a rebate, for example. They can't show it without any variation. So the pricing has internet pricing, brochures they might send out, any kind of advertising that they notice to a consumer. And advertising is a very broad concept. Anytime a price has to be displayed to a consumer, it has to be this particular price. And sometimes dealers in other states, and California as well, they've approached it a little differently. I know sometimes I'm from Florida, and they'll show the price. Then in the fine print, it'll say, unless a manufacturer provided rebate. Well, California, you can't do that.
Yeah.
So this rule, they got to sort of change their whole scope of advertising. So that also applies to the way they disclose it at point of sale. So when they're sitting down with a customer, they have to be very careful on how they disclose everything.
Yeah.
So now, Reynolds is in the forms business. We are developing forms in conjunction with the CNCD, the California New Car Dealer Association, on various forms to comply with the statute, 1784 of the California statutes, so that we will help the dealer with those full and fair disclosures. So they should be fine if they follow the protocol that we are providing.
No, that's good. That's good. So I want to go back a second to the internet pricing that you mentioned, because it reminded me of something. So the last car that I bought was for my wife, and obviously, looking for a vehicle online across all these different places. And the vehicle we ended up buying actually had 3 different prices on it, depending on what website you went to. From the dealership's website to third-party sites, it varied. So when I'm a dealer and I have really vendors helping me distribute information, right? How do I get my arms wrapped around that?
That is the challenge, isn't it? How do you do that? That's the complexity that really needs to be addressed by dealers. So I wish I had a simple solution for anybody. I mean, I feel bad for dealers who are trying to do it right, but I could see where they can make a simple error. But
right. Well,
sadly, that's a problem they're going to have to figure out.
Well, and in a lot of cases, I think really looking at where your inventory is going, right, and at what cadence it's going there. So, maybe your website is pulling from your DMS,
right,
and so that's going to be up to date in real time, or maybe it's batch overnight, whatever it might be. But then maybe a marketplace site, right, they're getting the feed 24 or 48 hours later because it goes through, a kind of a data broker. So if you update a price in one place and it hasn't been updated in another, then what do you do? And so, most dealers, and in the case that I'm talking about, it was a very simple conversation, like, hey, this is what I saw, show it to me, sure, we'll honor that price. That's fine. It's pretty straightforward. But in California now, even if they do honor that price, they're still breaking the law, right?
Potentially. Yes, they are. And this is all being studied. This is rather embryonic at this point.
Sure.
But you have a statement of what the law is, and then how do you interpret that? How do you find the application for it, and so forth? So that's sort of going being ferreted out.
Okay.
And the CNCDA should be able to provide assistance on that. Companies like Reynolds, we certainly can help them with updating appropriately and helping them with the disclosures.
Sure.
So that's our mission.
Yeah. Okay. No, it'll be an interesting road, I'd say, for to say the least.
Interesting is a funny way to describe that.
I just it's almost, I don't want to use too negative. It just feels annoying almost, as somebody that's looking to a dealer and wanting them to be successful, and it's like, man, it's just one more thing you got to worry about. It's cost of doing business.
And I attended the dealer day. California has a dealer day, and this bill in California was filed 5 days before the term was over. I mean, so they thought they were scot-free. Then this happened, and it happened, of course, because the Federal Trade Commission's proposed rule was overturned in the circuit in New Orleans last year at this time.
Right.
So, and where this goes from here, who knows?
Yeah.
Now, I should add, when you get back to the Car Bearers Bill of Rights, the old law, it was anticipated that law would be copied through all the other states. And it really only was followed up in Massachusetts and Minnesota to any degree.
Okay.
The big question now is, how will this affect other jurisdictions?
Right.
Unfortunately, for other jurisdictions, other states, it appears they are starting to follow this. Massachusetts is, Pennsylvania, they've already started to promulgate various rules, regulations, to sort of, and are also creating their own mini CFPBs in some of these states to track this. So this has caught attention, and once again, it gets back to all that disclosure. And the other inherent problem of this, there's part of the act is maintaining record keeping.
Yeah.
So the record keeping requirement for 2 years is pretty demanding, because you have to keep all the letters, complaints coming in, all of these sorts of things dealers didn't have to keep previously. And you're literally providing the rope to hang a dealer with with all these records to be kept.
Right.
Because if you fail to keep the records, that's implicated. It's evidence against you. So it's going to be a tremendous challenge for dealers.
Yeah. Yeah. Not one that seems like anybody's going to look forward to, but one that needs to be dealt with.
No, it's any new law that of this nature. The plaintiffs' counsel, they're going to be watching this like hawks. And now the good news is there's no private right of action, no private cause of action. But that's sort of temporary because California has the Unfair and Deceptive Trade Practices Act. So many of these things can be sort of placed into that category.
Yeah.
And there's also the argument that any violation of laws of this nature become are incorporated by reference in the federal law. So private right of action, but still the Department of Justice, the District Attorney's offices, the California Attorney General's office, Department of Motor Vehicles in California, they're all going to be watching this. They're all going to be making sure the dealers comply.
Yeah.
And initially, the initial compliance is usually the most dangerous because if dealers are not paying attention, they can really fall prey.
Sure. Okay. Boy, I mean, that's why these ADAs are so important, I think, too, right? And the work that they're doing.
I got to
so
say,
important.
the ADAs play such a crucial role for dealers. I mean, when I speak in front of dealer groups, I have the pleasure of doing from time to time, I always advocate, join your ADA. They're protecting your interests.
Right.
And some of them may listen to me, some of them don't.
Sure. Well, Terry, one other thing I wanted to get your perspective on while I have you here. You mentioned record keeping a minute ago and how important that is. And when you think about, the process of getting a deal done.
Sure.
And in some cases, how many different vendors and systems and pieces of paper can be a part of that process. Wanted to get your perspective on having kind of an embedded workflow through kind of the sales and F&I process where everything is in one place, right? It's consistent and documented. When you think about record keeping, it's not easy to do, but maybe if you can share your perspective on what that sort of embedded workflow can and should be and what impact it has.
Sure. Every dealer should have an established protocol, order, disclosure, in depth on how every transaction should happen so that the numbers all are organized in a manner that fulfill this full and fair disclosure process. The fact you might think some things that are in paper, other things might be in electronic format, that has to be considered in this whole calculus. So the consumer, and I'm looking at it from a total, because when I saw DocuPad years ago, my first thought was that's a great consumer tool because it helps the dealer provide a full roadmap for how someone can understand the transaction. So the same thing, if you were just using pencil and paper, how do you organize that progression?
Yeah.
And because unfortunately, I went undercover years ago as a finance manager a couple of times. I noticed how some finance managers didn't do that. They were misleading. And the dealer can control that with help from vendors, help from Reynolds, people like that, on how to create this seamless approach to presenting the transaction. What it'll do, of course, consumers will understand it better. They'll be satisfied. It'll be faster because you have a regular protocol, which is always important. Reducing the complaints, because complaints are always the basis for lawsuits.
Right.
I think that's such an important question you raise. So a protocol, follow it carefully, and maybe you have to be a little dictatorial with your sales force and your finance managers.
Sure. No, that's a fair point. That one that you landed on there is like you can set the expectation, but you have to enforce it, right?
Absolutely, yes.
And you got to inspect it, and you got to make sure that it's being followed.
And that's the other point. After the transaction's over, how are you auditing that transaction? I mean, how is everything being filed properly, electronically or otherwise? Do you keep that record keeping once again? How are you? Because if some of the record gets missed, well, someone comes in an audit. They're not going to audit to look out your interest. They're looking for somebody else's interest. Right. So that protocol that you mentioned is very important. Yeah,
and the audit's a whole different ballgame too. You start thinking about that, and it's so interesting. Whenever anybody gets kind of in trouble in an audit, it seems like it's harmless at the beginning, right? It really is, and maybe you forgot to scan something. Maybe you forgot to put something in a file. Maybe you took something out to review it, didn't put it back. And you have every intention to add it tomorrow. Right? Or to put it back tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes and you get busy and it doesn't happen. And then the next day comes and then it's a year from now and an audit comes and it's like, well, you didn't do this. And you have no defense at all.
No defense at all. And that's why some of the products, services we offer help dealers accommodate that. Yeah. And you don't realize how important that is until it's too late. 2-3 years from now.
Right.
What? You don't have that? And it's kind of interesting. The when I did my case at the Attorney General's office, 95% of them were based on documents.
Yeah.
Auditing the documents. And if they didn't have them, or they had them inappropriately prepared and so forth, that was dynamite for the prosecutor.
Right.
So,
right. No, it just needs attention. It always needs attention.
Of course.
At the end of the day, it doesn't have to be scary, but it does need attention and focus.
Yeah.
Well, Terry, I've really enjoyed. Every time I get to talk to you, I feel like I get a little bit smarter. I understand things a little bit better. But anything else that we haven't talked about that we should, or anything that I didn't ask?
I'm a paper peddler, right? I believe in the power of paper and the dynamics of documentation and so on. There are laws written for documents where you have to quote something verbatim. Then there are laws that say you have to provide this disclosure. You can choose how you want to provide that disclosure. Then there's sections of documents that fall into the general common law, contracts, and so forth. When we draft documents, we very strictly observe the law, how the law has to be followed. There's a lot of area that we draft that meets the requirements of the law, but we have a choice. We can make it more dealer-friendly, protective for dealers, and that's exactly what we do. We follow the law explicitly. When we draft documents, it's always minded, how can we protect dealers from any possible violation? Because remember, there are a lot of lawyers out there that are taking pot shots at dealers every day.
Yeah.
How can our documents and forms protect dealers from possibilities of that nature? So that's one of our central missions, and that's why we're very proud of the law document, because they attempt that objective.
Yep. Great stuff. Well, Terry O'Loughlin, thank you so much for joining me.
My
really
pleasure.
Appreciate you taking time out of your I'm sure,
It's
busy
been
day.
great. Thank you very much.
Can't wait to talk again.
Enjoyed it. Thank you very much.